Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky. Welcome back to Joe on Joe. This is the only podcast where I've covered every episode of the Sunbow cartoon, DIC, even G.I. Joe Extreme, and every issue of the Marvel Real American Hero comic book, page by page, panel by panel. And we've got another wonderful episode of You on Joe this week. That's right. One, I called it wonderful. I'm branding my own stuff, sure. But I really enjoyed this talk. But this is You on Joe. So this is you, the G.I. Joe fan. You love everything about G.I. Joe, Snake Eyes, Cobra Commander, Destro, the toys, the cartoons, whatever it is. You are the star of the show and your specific favorite aspect of the G.I. Joes. So whatever that is, you drive the conversation. Whatever you want to talk about, as long as it's about G.I. Joe, it is up for topics here. So if you want to participate and be a guest, please, please, please reach out to me on social media. It's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Joe and Joe Pod. Or you can send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com and let me know what you'd like to cover. The more specific, the better. And I need guests, guys. So I need to get bulked up for the next couple of months. So please, please, please reach out. If you ever thought about being on the show, it takes nothing more than giving a call and getting on Zoom. Like I'm assuming everyone's on Zoom now. So it's super easy. You don't have to have anything technical. We make it real easy and we just have a lovely conversation and we talk G.I. Joe. What could be better than that? So while you're online, please give me a rate and review in your favorite podcast app. Every review helps grow this show. If you're inclined, you can visit our Patreon page. Patreon.com/JoeandJoePod. You can help keep the show working that way. And speaking of that, give some love to our great sponsors, the Movies and a Meal podcast. In the beginning of time, the smallest organism gained sentience and thought to itself, I really need a good meal. Then a bunch of other stuff happened, and finally the Lumiere brothers started showing movies in France. This was all the inspiration that fellow broadcasters Brad, Keith, and Ben needed to combine these two primal needs into the Movies and a Meal podcast. The Movies and a Meal is one of the most casual and relaxing film talk podcasts you could ever listen to. These three friends enjoy a good meal together while talking all about the movies. And not just reviews, they do favorite lists, comparison discussions, genre talks, anything and everything that you can think of. They've even broken their solemn promise inherent in the name and branched out into TV talk. So I love the variety of films they bring to the table. They cover new releases, classics, cult films, often in one episode. It's really a delight to listen to, and it has something for every movie fan out there to enjoy. So if you're looking to grow your podcast library, if you eat meals, and if you've ever seen a movie, then you should give Ben, Keith, and Brad a listen and subscribe to the Movies and a Meal podcast. They've been a great sponsor to this show. I love the Movies and a Meal podcast, and I'd like all of you to love them too. Now this week, I am really honored to welcome our neighbor from the north, Jordan Bonaparte, alongside his son, Dom, to talk about what we are calling Generational Joe. Jordan is a podcaster from Halifax. He keeps Canada informed and weird with his amazing nighttime podcast. He regularly covers Canadian crime, which we all know is the most polite crime of all crime. Now, you need to follow him on Twitter at NighttimePod, and you need to check out his podcast. It should be on all your podcatchers. It's really great. It's Canadian, so it's polite and weird and nitty gritty. It's the crime. He's got a great following. He's a wonderful dude to listen to. So please give him a listen. And Jordan is a big time G.I. Joe fan. So he wanted to discuss about how G.I. Joe has connected him with his young son, who was Dom. Dom's a super talent himself. He's a budding G.I. Joe fan. I think he's going to be starting his own podcast soon. So get ready, world. And just like the great Dom from Fast and the Furious, he's all about family. So he joined in this conversation too, and we reminisced all about how G.I. Joe has connected us generationally. Fathers, sons, mothers, sons, and kids and dads and all that stuff, and how it's still connecting them and us today. So this is the kind of conversation that I wish I had saved for Father's Day, but that would require planning. So here it is, the first week of May, and we're talking about this, but it's really great. I really absolutely cannot diminish, undersell, or oversell, whatever that would be, how much I enjoyed this conversation. So sit back, please, put on your nostalgia cap, slip into your 10-year-old psyche, and enjoy this generational Joe talk that I had with Jordan Bonaparte and Dom. Major gun runner.
Manufacturer.
Distributor. Yeah. Yeah. Mars Industry ain't got nothing on me.
Arbco Gun Supplies.
Arbco Gun Supplies and head wax. Whether it's chrome plated or just straight up bald, Arbco will keep that paint clean.
You could do an amazing Destro cosplay, hey, with just a bit of silver.
Oh yeah, do like Silverman on the street, like they painted silver, shave the beard,
and just like a red leather robe.
Oh, just keep the chest out. I don't know about you. When you were a kid, did you realize that Destro had an open chest like that, like a 70s open collar thing?
No, I never, like in the cartoons, they don't really lean on like the chest hair. You don't, only every so often you get a little look at it. But when you think of what he's wearing without anything underneath it, it is a pretty intimidating costume. And I could see why Baroness was interested in it.
Jordan, it's so wild. I literally was an absolute adult when it dawned on me or was pointed out to me, or I forget how it went, that he had an open chest and that was like a necklace medallion, like of the time.
It is just like a typical Irish, bare-chested.
I had no idea that was Destro because the toy is it's not like flesh colored, it's kind of yellowy. So I just thought he rocked like an orange or yellow shirt or something. I had no idea that was supposed to be flesh.
Do you like the steel-headed Destro, or are you like the Iron Grenadier gold-plated?
So I'm a steelhead, but. We covered Iron Grenadiers on you, Joe, and I came to have a real good appreciation for the gold face. I mean, I've always admired it from a distance, but I've always been like, I'm a steelhead guy.
I think the gold head's cool.
I just really cool.
Yeah, and it gives Destro a chance to stretch out, run his own company, really make money, and kind of play the different alliances against each other for his benefit. But if we're talking about outfits and weird things, it's odd to see Destro shirtless and think of him that way, or I guess bare-chested and think of him that way. But you make a good point in some of your old episodes where in the cartoon, Torpedo always had his flippers on, even if he was running around like in the woods, or Quick Kick barefoot in the snow everywhere. In one episode.
Yeah, it was always no one was ever in appropriate clothing for their environment at all.
Maybe that's what it made it special, because they're like with G.I. Joe, they're just a step away from being superheroes, and a part of that is maintaining that costume. It's just G.I. Joe, they keep things practical and realistic enough that it stands out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. But every once in a while, though, they will throw a curveball at you by putting everyone in a jacket. And then you'll get a snow adventure, and it'll be everyone in a jacket, but then there's Quick Kick with no shirt on and in a jacket. And it's like, Quick Kick, you can do both. You can both wear a shirt and put on a snow jacket. It's not going to hurt you. So they always rode that fine line. I was a big fan always of their scuba gear when they would put him in the scuba outfits, because like they were just not plain vanilla, but they were all the same. They were all pretty uniform, except of course for Lady J, because she had no pants. But they were always pretty uniform, and I thought that was cool. And so it was nice to aren't we getting, or didn't they do, or were they going to do a Super 7 with her in her scuba gear or something like that?
Oh, they should.
There's something like that. Yeah, there's something like that was people were talking about. Because I always thought the scuba gear look was cool. Yeah. And
many complaints.
No complaints. And that they kept it separate from Torpedo's look or wetsuits look. Like they weren't just wearing those guys' outfits.
Yeah. But speaking of that, it is sad to see so many beloved characters get replaced. Where on G.I. Joe, it only takes a couple months, and you have like the new version of the flamethrower guy. Yeah. And we're going through the comic books, and it's like we do one a night where if you were reading them in real time, what we can read in 2 weeks spans a year. So in our mind, every second week, like everybody's getting replaced by the new version of this and that. And it's like, like we even have a new baseball guy. There was like early on, there was like, was it dodgeball or something? Now we have Grand Slam.
No, it's not Grand Slam. You're thinking of, no, not Wild Card. What's his name?
Hardball? You thinking
Hardball? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not digging him.
That's the thing when you go back and this was something that dawned on me as I went through all the Joe and Joe Illustrated, is that half of these guys that we all love, the adventures were in our heads.
Oh, absolutely.
Like there really weren't a lot of singular adventures for the vast majority of the Joes. Like the comics really circled around, Snake Eyes and, occasionally Flint and Jay and Duke and things like that. And then you'd get like a Battle Force 2000 episode, and then they would get killed in the next issue. Like there's
hopefully so.
Yeah, or hopefully
those guys. Yeah, you can kind of tell. It's very obvious when they're trying to sell you a toy. It's really obvious. We just went through the comic book series that has Darklon comes out of nowhere. Character, and it's just like, this is craziness. Yeah. But it's obvious. Like, when that comic came on store shelves, so did the toy. And it was probably right next to each other.
Yeah, and in a weird way, it sort of, very much so, it became the Cobra show, I think, in the last, throw a number out there, 50 issues. It became very much a Cobra show. And that might be because the Cobra, all they did was rotate new Vipers at that era. There weren't a lot of new faces, right? Mm-hmm. So Larry's able to just do Cobra Commander stories and, Zartan stories. And then, like you said, Voltar or Darkline, rather.
Like just pop them in. And,
here's a new guy. True. And exactly. But he didn't have to deal with introducing 15 new guys. There was just like one new Cobra face for that season. So he could work that guy into it and still tell ongoing stories of Cobra. And then he would rely on the Joes that he already established, which, the Snake Eyes of the world and all that stuff. Yeah, it
makes sense.
It's always interesting. And so much of it is in our head. And which is part of why I'm so excited to have you on today with Dom, host of the Nighttime podcast, Jordan Bonaparte. You specifically, I hope Dom's not on this because it's a true crime podcast.
He comes on occasion, never for the crime stuff, because I do crime, but I brand it as like Nighttime's about Canadian crime, mysteries,
Canadian crime,
I don't know, UFOs,
Canadian crime, the kindest crime of them all.
Oh yeah, like, sorry about that, because I talk about car accidents mainly.
I saw that,
and then there's mysteries and just weird stories. So he comes on a lot because I do a weekly episode where I just take the prior week's weirdest Canadian news stories and just break them down. And it's a big country and there's always something crazy happening. So once a week I got some wild story, and he usually will come on and give the kind of perspective a 10-year-old child could,
which is the kind of perspective we really need, because Canada has some weird crime. And we first met because you reached out to have me on your show. I was racking my brain. I'm like, I've known Jordan now for a little while and he's never been on the show. And so I'm happy to have you on today.
I'm happy to be here. I'm a massive fan. I didn't know we were going to do cosplay, though. You got for people who are just listening and can't see, you got a great shipwreck uniform on. They look like pajamas, but is that a costume? No, it's a shipwreck costume. And you got the little hat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
You look really cute.
No, I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I have a robotic Polly talking cosplay that I like to wear around the house, and it really annoys my wife.
Yeah, it's weird. When you listen to the show, I don't picture you in the full shipwreck uniform, but it is neat.
Yeah, it's good. Well, it's one of the reasons why I don't do it on video, because I don't want to embarrass myself 100%, but I need to get mentally in the zone there. Like I need to get there, and the only way to get there is to really dress up like Hector.
Yeah, and it is small too. Like if you're going to do this on video, you'd want one that fits appropriately, because I can tell it's.
Well, I've been wearing this. I've been wearing this one since like 1989. I think that So between the washings, and growth, vertical, horizontal growth on my side. But the thing is, you get a good suit, a good shipwreck suit. You don't want to mess with it, right? You don't want to have tailors take it out, because then it gives you nothing aspirational to fit into, and you're not going to find a better version of it. So
exactly,
it's I rock it.
It's home.
It's home. It makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel good. It's the skin I live in.
Well, let's get to it. Like I said at the beginning, pumped to be on your show. I've been going through. Well, my son and we've been going through the show, now the comic books, and whatever we watch, the next thing we do is find your episode about that. And it's added so much more to the show. Or the comic. We'll spend 20 minutes reading the comic, but then we get to sit with you for, an hour afterwards and debrief.
Well, that's very kind of you. And that is 100% why how I designed the show to be. Like that's what I wanted it to be. I wanted to real creepily sit on people's shoulders and talk G.I. Joe, just whisper G.I. Joe nothings in their ears. So you guys have nailed it. You've achieved
perfect.
maximum Joe.
And it's what I love about podcasts, because it's like there are so many different podcasts about anything you can imagine.
Yeah.
So if I'm digging up this show that I enjoyed as a child, there would never be like a professionally produced by Hasbro, breakdown episode by episode, comic by comic by someone who's like loves it and lives it. So having like you to do that, it's such a treat. So again, I appreciate it so much what you've done for years too. You've been at it forever.
Yeah, over 7. Yeah, well, that genuinely means a lot. Thank you. And I certainly enjoyed being on your show. We were talking about just the joy of G.I. Joe and the joy of collecting. And today you really wanted to reach out and talk about, which is why I'm glad Dom's on too, is I guess we're calling this like the parental connection, right? Like
I like that.
Yeah, the generational connection that G.I. Joe gave us. And I think there's a lot to cover there. I know certainly I had one of those. You have one with your son Dom. So tell me about
my 10-year-old.
Yeah, 10 years old, which 10's that age that I said we all found G.I. Joe at,
I was in the backyard hitting them with hammers when I was his age, or burying them in the swamp. But we could call it like parental connections, or why G.I. Joe is the perfect IP to connect with your son when you're a 40-ish-year-old.
That's a long title.
Well, that's how it works, though. But it's perfect.
How about this? Generation Joe.
Oh, that could be the series after you.
From the man who brought you the name Joe on Joe, I give you today's episode named Generation Joe. So yeah, so talk to me, you and Dom. How did you guys find it together? Now, obviously, you've obviously known him his whole life.
I was there when he was born. Yeah, it was a horrible night. But so first of all, my background with it is like you yourself. When I was a kid, I was born in '81. So when I was say 5, 6, 7 years old was when G.I. Joe, like the movie, was coming out, when things were really happening. I had an older brother, so he had been collecting Joe since the beginning. So once I got into it, I already had a collection of vehicles and figures, and the movie was on, and this was just as the DIC series was coming out. So it was kind of like I caught it on the downward trajectory, I guess, but it was still like I was only 7, 8, 9 as I was really getting into it. Then I just forgot about it for years. I had like a garbage bag of figures that I think I just threw to landfill probably, and I'll never forget my father for that. Because I had it all. I didn't have the flag, but I had a ton of figures that we just chucked.
Put your Toy Story brain on and think of how many landfill adventures all of our Joes are having. There's like 18 breakers hanging out having coffee. All missing various pieces of themselves. Half of them have thumbs.
It's a horror movie. Yeah, all with broken crotches, which is maybe the darkest part.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, Don, do you remember how we got into it?
No.
I think what we did is we went through like a phase of, I would just play a different TV show from my childhood. Like we do, play an Inspector Gadget episode, play an Astro Boy episode, play a Ninja Turtles episode, and just kind of show him what stuff was like when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And then just out of nowhere, I think we were just like, let's watch a G.I. Joe episode. And it's amazing how timeless it is. It stands up as far as entertainment and just the pacing of the show and the variety of characters and storylines. It doesn't seem like you're watching this show from the 80s. Like if you sit down today and watch, I don't know, an old Scooby-Doo or an Inspector Gadget even, it just feels old, and it's not structured the way a television show would be today. But the first season, like right from the beginning, G.I. Joe, it's like, yeah, this is good. This stuff's happening.
I remember at the beginning, I didn't actually like it until I saw this guy covering the toys, and I was like, that looks cool. I'll sit down and watch this.
Yeah, we watched Michael Mercy. Because we had watched the show, and then we got into, on YouTube, we found fellow Canadian Michael Mercy, who has an amazing collection of figures, and he has a YouTube series where he goes year by year. So he's like, I don't know, the G.I. Joes of 1983. And he will show you in his hand every figure and vehicle released that year. So we were watching that, and that got him into not only the show, but the figures. and it just, I guess, just kind of evolved from there. But as we've been probably 2 years now, we've been pretty hard into.
Yeah.
We watched the whole series of
Except
television shows.
DIC. We tried one DIC, and then we were like, this is not good.
Yeah, that was tough. That was tough.
Out of the
Yeah.
mouths of babes.
Yeah, well, it's
Even
it's
all
a
these,
shame.
all these years later. It's funny because there was something magical about the Sunbow recipe. Just the way that they did it, and yes, we know a lot of it had to do with budget, but it was also they told the stories in different manners. Like they did different things with the pacing and the stuff. There's something about it that Sunbow did right, and DIC just sat there.
Yeah, it's a shame, but we went through all that, and then we got into together like the collecting, and I was kind of explaining to him. He got probably to learn a lot about my childhood before iPads and Netflix and even good TV. Like, 'cause, other than Saturday morning, there was nothing good to watch the rest of the week. So I'd be out in the backyard, digging GI Joe bases in the mud and playing with my figures back there for the other 5 or 6 days when nothing was on TV. So that was kind of like, even that concept to a 10-year-old it's different. Nowadays you don't play with toys. Toys are meant to be sold, collected, and put on a shelf, and that's it. When we were kids, toys were made to be, like I said, beaten with a hammer in the backyard, and they still continued to tick, and they were priced accordingly, and it was just a different world. So through GI Joe, he was able to kind of get a taste of that. And what we're on to now, again, thanks in part to what you do on your show, we're deep into comic books. I've never been a collector or very into them in any meaningful way, but when we finished the TV show, the Sunbow version, and we're like, DIC's kind of lame, we moved on to let's try the comics. And from comic book one, I was just thinking, we both loved it. We read them each night in bed before he goes to sleep. But I wish they would make a cartoon today, have Sunbow do it, and just follow the story of the comics, because the comics are incredible.
Yeah, they really are. That's not a terrible idea to do.
It would be perfect.
Yeah, to do an animated version that follows the comics. That's a little it's a little instead of like reimagining the sauce, just take the take the good sauce that works and go, here you go. That's not a terrible concept.
We've tried some of the other shows, like there's like GI Joe Renegades.
Yeah, that and Extreme.
Yeah, Extreme and Sigma 6.
They're only okay. But just talking on that idea of having like a comic book, a cartoon made based on the comic book, the original TV series, it had to be one and done storylines, because back then you didn't binge watch a show, and
Right.
maybe you would catch it and you wouldn't see it for 3 weeks or whatever. So they couldn't really have a continuous storyline. But nowadays, the way people consume television shows, you can have a continuous story that carries from one episode to another, even on a children's show, because people are watching it on Netflix or YouTube or whatever. So the comic books, I think, would really work as a TV show now, because there are one-off standalone episodes, but there are also these story arcs that will span 4 or 5 episodes. I don't know. And the story in the comics is a bit more adult, but it's still for kids. Like, we read them together and completely get every aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, there's also something about G.I. Joe that's intrinsically 1980s. And every time they've done they're updating it for modern times, and even in the comics, they've done that, where they've updated it for modern times. And there's just something in the mix that just doesn't sit, like it for me, it's my tastes. If they were to do it and just set it, not necessarily lock it down to make it like although that's a fun concept. If you did like it with all this, Dom, do you watch Stranger Things?
No, but my dad has.
Yeah, you might be a little young for it. There's some scary stuff in there. But like a lot of
the first season.
A lot of teens and stuff, and they do that. And so what's bigger now than 80s nostalgia, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you come back and you do a G.I. Joe, animation project and set it when it's supposed to be set, you've got a lot of potential for both like that 80s fun humor, that setting that people are loving, You could do the whole use 80 song soundtrack stuff if you wanted to.
No, it'd be all
but-
Cold Slither.
Yeah, well, of course, but it would then have that vibe, and you wouldn't have to deal with a lot of the ramifications of modern times, because modern military politics is crazy, and
Yeah.
and at the time, the politics of the time were pretty cut and dried. It was as cut and dried, I think, as since as it had been since World War II, right? It was, America was like, we're good, commies are bad, and terrorists are bad, and America's good, right? It's a real easy, not to actually get into the politics of it, but like that concept of it was real easy for people to understand. So you could get behind the flag waving of it. And just setting anything in a more modern world, it's harder to get those simple concepts across. And if you can't get the basics across of who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, any stories you're going to tell are going to have trouble, really landing with an audience, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? If they did something like that and it was a success, maybe that is what has to happen to get like the regular sized Joes on store shelves.
Oh, sure.
Because like with him, he'd
Yeah.
love to collect it, but there's no way I'm buying him like, a $40 classified figure
Yeah.
with
I know.
70 accessories.
Complete. Yeah. It's what, I forget which one it was. It was either the classifieds, or I think it was actually Super Sevens. I'm almost positive on the packaging, it says this is not a toy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it says this is
Yeah.
for adult collectors. This is not a toy. And I'm like, I'm holding a toy, and yet the packaging is telling me it's not a toy, which is wild. Yeah. So yeah,
It's-
that's the kind of thing I don't know. I think they would have some success in that. But when I was coming up, all my toys, and like you were just saying, you'd buy that for Dom. All my stuff came from my parents, right? So not their influence at all, but their money. It was, I had my weekly chores and stuff. I'd get my allowance. I think the max allowance I ever got was like $250 a week. And not saying my parents were cheap. I'm saying that was a long time ago.
Yeah. Oh, well, a Joe only would have been $2 on
Exactly.
a shelf
That's
or
like one
something.
Joe a
So
week.
Friday night, you finish your school week and you go buy a new Joe.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
There's your weekend.
Yeah. But like that was the thing though. So like your parents were your gatekeepers. They were your tastemakers. We didn't have the YouTubes of the world. So I've told this story where my mother, she got me my first Joe comic books. She certainly bought me actual G.I. Joe #1. We bought it a few years before I really got into comics. But then when I got into comics, she bought me the digests, and I got it as a gift for Easter. I'm sorry, the Easter Bunny brought it for me. And it was a thing where I said,
Don't worry, he's in the know. He
okay,
knows.
good.
It's cool.
I said to my mom, I'm like, what is this? Like, they kept making G.I. Joe comic books. She's like, I guess. I bought them collected. And so it became a journey for me with my mother to track down these G.I. Joe comic books. And then I would tell her about them. I'm like, did you know this happened? And look at these guys. And this all happened. And, oh my God, this guy's really a ninja. And his uncle got killed. And then his other uncle got killed. Oh. And it was real connective tissue. To this day, my mom still knows something about G.I. Joe. Like I think she listens occasionally. She certainly does if I ping her to an episode I think she'll like. But
Yeah.
she still gets the concepts.
Yeah, I think any kind like we as adults can look at G.I. Joe as this nostalgic thing and the fandom or whatever. But I think at the heart of it, it's from the very beginning, it was made for children who would be going to their parents for the products or the toys.
Mm-hmm.
It was marketed to kids in a way that the kid would go to their, like, I need to get the new vehicle or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of like G.I. Joe having a part to play in a lot of kids bonding with their parents, I think that's reasonable to say. And again, with nostalgia being so powerful, I'm sure there's a lot of people like me who are like, I'd love to sit and read G.I. Joe comics all day, but I'm a parent. I don't have time for that. But maybe if I can convince my kid to read G.I. Joe comics with me, that's what I've done. We're on, I think, almost 90 now.
I think we're gonna read 90 tonight.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we, we're digging it. We do voices and all too. Like he does a great
fun.
Destro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of you got Baroness down a little bit.
You still got that high pitched voice. A couple of years, you won't be able to do awareness.
Yeah, not great with the Dreadnoks though, but we do enjoy whenever they get up to their
I love the
hijinks.
Dreadnoks, everyone sounds like Mad Max.
Yeah. The Dreadnoks are amazing though. I've loved them since I was a kid. I remember thinking like these are the baddest bikers in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get as a kid that they were just drinking pop and eating donuts. But I guess they couldn't have like beer and cigarettes.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're pretty cool. I like them.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you, Dom? Do you like actually like play with the toys with your father? Like, or is it just like you guys read it, or do you go off and have your own adventures and then you guys come together to read the comics?
No, actually, me, my brother, and my dad usually have these things we call G.I. Joe battles where, like, we have a bin full of knockoff, like, core and other G.I. Joe, G.I. knockoffs, and, we pick, like, 5 or so reels, and then we just, like, have a battle.
Yeah. I'm kind of in charge of storytelling. So
Okay.
when he says his brother, he has a 5-year-old brother.
Great.
So what we'll do is we'll take a couple of the good Joes to be kind of leaders. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to have all the expensive Joes in the back room. So we'll have, we'll pick out a couple Joes. And then we have a whole bunch of, you remember the core figures? CORPS, Corpse? They were, back when we were kids, you would go to the
Were they sold
toy
at like
store.
Zare or Venture?
I don't know those American stores.
Sorry.
But we would when you would
I
go
do
to the
know what
toys.
you're talking. Yes.
Yeah, there would be you could get say a GI Joe for $3, but there'd be just this weird knockoff one for $1.
Yes.
We got a bunch of those, and we kind of use those as our human shields. So if we're playing a battle, we'll come up with a story, and it usually involves a MacGuffin device. So I don't know, we'll just pick something off of his 5-year-old brother's train set or something. And Cobra's going to use
the
this.
Canadian hockey dominator this week.
Yeah, so it's like the Cobra is going to use this thing to, do whatever horrible thing to the world, and then the 5 GI Joe figures we're using will have to come up with a plan to get it back, and they will use their army of cheap knockoff GI Joes to make that happen.
Yeah, I do. I actually do remember the core. Were they less articulated, or like why were they?
I never
had them as a kid.
Well, for one, they had no personality because they weren't based on characters. It would just be a generic ninja or a generic motorcycle guy or, whatever. It was obviously just made to be, if your parent goes to the store to buy G.I. Joe figures, they could pay $3 for a Joe or $1 for one of these. And that was probably enough to move them off the shelves. Yeah. But because of that, you can get them dirt cheap on the market, like at a collector's convention or something. You get a bag of them for a couple bucks.
Oh, cool!
And they are compatible with GI Joe, so you can the vehicles are all the same size, and you can kind of swap.
There's no copyright in 3 3/4 inches, is there?
Well, copyright was a whole different thing back then. Like you talk about it in your show sometimes. Is it Dodger has like the Boston Red Sox hat on?
Oh, Cutter. Cutter does.
Cutter, yeah. Just something as simple as that. Or in
all the Transformers cars. They did a whole line of vehicles that eventually the owners of those vehicles were like, you can't do this anymore.
You can't do this.
Yeah. So it's like, Porsche's like, no, you pay us a lot of money.
Well, it was one of the comics that we were reading recently. One of the characters had an AC/DC shirt on. I think you may have been reading. You were Star Viper, yeah. Okay. He was wearing an AC/DC shirt. I think you may have been reading a reprint or something, because in your comic, I remember on air you were saying it says ADCD or something instead of AC/DC, but ours was like the straight up AC/DC logo.
Funny. So the original. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but just like back in that era, I guess a lot of that copyright in stuff, it just wasn't tested because there wasn't a real reason for it. But now in the era we live in, you could never do that.
And also when it came to comic books back in the day, it was such a wild west. Stuff would slip by editors that like today, if it slips by, it's all over social media. People get fired and everything. Back in the day, they would slip stuff like Jim Shooter sucks, like into
putting
the comic
Rambo
book.
Putting Rambo in it. Rambo in
exactly.
It
yeah, like they would absolutely just do things like that, and no one could. There was one of my favorites is the writers and creators did a secret crossover between Aquaman and Namor with the exact same villain in the same cities, but they did it in the pages of Aquaman, and then it continued in the pages of Namor.
Wow.
And it was their companies didn't even realize it until it came out. Like I think it was I think Roy Thomas and maybe Marty Pasco might have been involved, but yeah, like they were friends and collaborated and said, let's do a secret crossover, and it was like, okay. And Aquaman fought this villain, and then Namor fought the villain.
Yeah, a different
that doesn't
time,
fly that much anymore.
No, but I wonder if that's why G.I. Joe, as the IP, like as the brand or whatever, was able to do so much cool stuff. Like, was it the era? Like, I'm just thinking nowadays you would never have this brand that is making like a TV show, has a great comic, a great toy line, is merchandised all over the place, yet everything is really good. Like when they were hitting the right notes in the beginning, it's like all that stuff. The best toys they were revolutionizing toys. The comics were incredible, and the show was like the hottest thing on TV, at least as I remember as a kid. Of course, they couldn't do it forever, but at the time, man, that was like my childhood was all about G.I. Joe.
Yeah, and did you connect? I know you said you got it from your older brother. Did you connect with your parents through G.I. Joe at all, like you're doing with your son?
Like what I remember is like I'd be done school on Friday or something, and my dad would take me. He'd be going to the grocery store or something, and he'd let me get one G.I. Joe figure or something like that, and that'd be about it. But I do remember my dad taking me to the theater to see the movie. If I recall, I was a little kid.
Did it air?
I remember. Yeah, I think they.
Because that was the thing. Like I don't think it aired at theaters. I know it didn't in the U.S. It was like it never had a theatrical release. Maybe
it may even have been like after, because I'm from like kind of a small town where things were done a little differently, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Right. Yeah, so it was actually.
I grew up in an even smaller spot, so it wouldn't be unusual. Yeah. Some guy gets like the VHS and he's like, $3.
That was actually 1994, and it was with an old Betamax.
Yeah, that sort of thing. But I remember the movie. I was probably a little younger than him when I saw the movie, and my mind was completely blown. The production was such a level above the show even, which at the time, if you compare the early G.I. Joe series to other shows at the time, it was already a level above. But the movie was a step above that. And then just the storyline was such a departure from the military style thing, all the Cobra Law. I was young enough to be like, okay, this is awesome. I was all for the sci-fi stuff. Cool. But I think my son, I don't think you're as into like the weird characters.
Yeah, Tom, what part of the Joes do you really appreciate? Like, what's your favorite thing? It's Dom on Joe right now. What's your favorite part about G.I. Joe, Dom?
I like the military stuff, but like the sci-fi stuff is cool.
Yeah.
Who is some characters?
Who's who's your favorite character?
I think I could tell you who his favorite character is. Whenever Snake Eyes is on, you're like, here we go.
Here we go.
He just like he often talks about your Snake Eyes kill count.
Yeah, that was he did pretty good. For a kid's book, Snake Eyes racked up a pretty good count.
Yeah, you really like the vehicles too. I feel like that's something you get swept up on. Lately you've been talking about the Pogo.
Yes, I love the Pogo.
I had the Pogo when I was a kid.
So does he.
Crazy. I would always think
we got it a couple weeks ago.
I was such a literal kid. I would always think it could only go up and down. Like I didn't.
Yeah.
I was like, how does it?
Yeah. And then you see them prancing through the field, shooting rockets. The least practical vehicle.
100%
in the whole fleet.
100%.
We bought one we were at a collectible convention a couple weeks ago, and a guy was selling one nearly complete. So that is on our shelves. Our next G.I. Joe battle, the Pogo, will definitely become involved in some way. We also got Raptor, who was introduced right around the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they introduced him and the Pogo in the exact same issue. Very close.
I liked Raptor, unironically, before I realized, and I enjoyed him for many years, before I realized the world thought he was kind of a joke. I didn't realize Raptor was considered a joke. I always liked Raptor.
There are plenty of jokes within the G.I. Joe universe, but Raptor, I think he's cool. If you're going to have a character go all in, and he certainly goes all in.
Talking about open chest, like him and Mindbender, they rock that open chest look. It's a precedent. It's a precedent.
Mindbender is the most intimidating doctor in the universe for sure. He is a tough dude.
Mm-hmm.
And an amazing inventor. His introduction of the bats.
Yeah,
is he an orthodontist?
Yeah, and he's an orthodontist.
You can do it all. Orthodontist braces. So a natural segue to like robotics.
Robotics, yeah, of course. I mean, what says robots more than inflicting pain on young children's teeth?
As a joke, they should have had all the bats having teeth that are like just perfectly straight.
That's a really funny gag. Yeah, like the first, or at least they show the first generation, and they're like, why are they all grinning and showing off their teeth? And he's like, well, I mean, isn't this what you want people to look like? I mean, I figured this was the perfection. They're like, go back to the design, but how about just a face, just a blank kind of a cover up that mouth.
Yeah, underneath that helmet, though, I think there's a perfect set of teeth.
So, Dom, you love Snake Eyes. Is there a version of Snake Eyes that you really, really dig? Did you know how there's like the original in the comic? He was more of a commando, and then he became more of a ninja, and then he became like he started wearing like baseball pads.
What do you think, bud? I
like
think
his blue his blue period.
You get excited when he's doing ninja stuff, but in the first Silent issue, he was very much a commando there, and I don't know if I've seen you as excited as we were going through that Silent issue.
That's pretty good. Do you have any Snake Eyes figures? Any original Snake Eyes figures?
Actually, we do have the very first one, but it's like it has like a bit of white paint on it.
Yeah, whatever kid owned it before us was got a little wild with their Joes. One was chewed up by a dog. The kid whoever it was, he decided to paint our Snake Eyes white and our eel. We have a Cobra eel that he got wild with the paint with as well. But Snake Eye, we have the original Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and they're often involved in our play. We've had them in there. We've had them feuding.
Really?
That's really cool. Snake Eyes, Dom. So Snake Eyes was my very first figure. He was the guy. He was the one that introduced me to G.I. Joe. So I was given to him by a friend for a birthday present.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and I was like, who is this? And why is he changing my life right now? And they're like, his name's Snake Eyes, and he's awesome. I was like, oh, you're right.
Yeah, but then it's at the time, like he was quite the kind of creative character, because at the time, if you look at the rest of the figures that you would have been able to collect at that time, they were all just like green guys. Yeah. Like there wasn't much else, and then just Snake Eyes. I get they were trying to save money with the paint or whatever, but it was what an amazing look.
Oh, yeah,
and then to give him an Uzi and a sword.
Yeah, no face, no paint.
Just an Uzi and a sword.
Sword was
all
part
black.
2. Sword was part 2. But yeah, just give him an Uzi. Give him don't paint him and put a mask on him. We got a guy.
Doesn't need it. So version 1, there was no sword.
No,
just
no
Uzi.
sword. That's why they call it like. That's why they differentiate between commando versus ninja. Like it's kind of a dividing line when you see him in those. When you see him in like the sunglass look. Typically, this is how I've seen it portrayed in the comics. When they're drawing them with like the sunglasses, they tend to lean more towards commando action, and then when he goes visory, he's a little more ninja.
I like to think
hard and fast, but
I like to think in the first version they didn't give a sword because he just simply didn't need it with his bare hands. I think
he also survives radiation.
Yeah,
even as
he
a
can do
kid,
anything.
even as a young child, I was like, that guy's glowing. How is he alive? That man is glowing.
But the stuff he can do in the comics, we often say, like, if G.I. Joe really wanted to defeat Cobra, they could have just sent, like, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow to Cobra Island. Just be like, just kill everyone there and then come back.
Yeah, that's
been nothing.
That would be quite a kill count. Yeah, that would be. Yeah.
They'd have no trouble at all. You just cut the power to Cobra Island, have Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes sneak in at night with their bare hands. It'd be a bloodbath.
So Dom, when you guys play, you said Dad does the stories. Is there like, do you do deep stories or do you just really kind of get to the, is it like, I don't know if you've ever played like role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons where there's like a lot of character stuff and then you go to fight the person. Do you do a lot of character work or is it just like, hey man, Cobra stole something, let's fight?
It's mostly like action, not character development.
I think we do a lot of characters, but we also where we're playing with a 5-year-old, it very quickly turns to the 5-year-old swinging his figure at his 10-year-old brother.
Sorry, you're right. Yeah.
So it gets, when he says there's a lot of action, like when we play GI Joes, people get hurt. Like it gets wild.
Yeah.
Like stop hitting me with the helicopter.
That's not fun.
No, it isn't. They were hard back then. That's why we can't use classified. People be bleeding.
I almost said I was an only child. I have two older sisters, but they were way not into GI Joe. So I was a solo dude. My buddies on the street did, but for the most part it was me chilling with my guys. So I was able to slow down the action. Like I'm talking beat for beat, like bullet for bullet. It would be like he shoots and then it wasn't like slam, 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 right? There was really not a lot of fast action. It was more of like this orchestrated thing happens. Dom, do you prefer like fast slam action, or do you kind of like take your time and be like, and then he jumps to the left?
Well, if we had enough time and like if the figures like some of the figures I won't even touch because I'm worried like will I break this?
Oh, sure.
So if I had the time and like the money, I would probably like do like slow, but since like we only have like we have like
we have a lot of GI Joes.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We do have a lot.
I think if you were left to your own devices, if you had a lock on your door, you would probably spend a lot of time organizing them and setting them up, and then like stop and come back to it the next day. But I think playing with your brother changes it a bit because you can't set up a battle and then walk away from it because the other guy's like Godzilla. He'll just plow through it.
Yeah, dealing with a 5, you're 100% right. Like, when a 5-year-old's in play, yeah. Like when I was 5, it was Star Wars for me, and there wasn't a lot of deep character movements there. It was big sword fights and laser battles and ships ramming into other ships. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it.
And then crying because your brother has the figure.
And then crying because everything breaks because you're slamming them. Like all our Star Wars toys were broken. By the time I got to GI Joe, I learned my lesson on the Star Wars toys. So all the GI Joe toys were pretty mint.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my play sounded more like yours. Is I would spend more time with the story and the preparation. Like I would have all my Joes on one side of the living room in their vehicles facing the other end. Yeah. The other end, I'd have the Terrordrome in the middle and all the Cobra figures like lined up. And I'd just in my head, I'd go for hours about what this battle was about. And oftentimes, by the time it came to actually start attacking, I'd be like, meh. Yeah. Let's start building a different battle. I'm going to go outside. There was a little stream behind the house, my father's house, and I'm sure if you excavated that stream, you would find a couple $100 worth of GI Joe figures.
Hey, listen, I'm not going to lie. My Sunday mornings at church were absolutely spent imagining what adventure I was going to have when I got home, because that was like my big play day. So I'd be sitting in Sunday and be like, all right, who wants? Okay, well, today's Flint's going to do this. And he's going to get in some hijinks. I just got Blowtorch, so I want to play with Blowtorch. And I would sit there on the back of, every week they would give you a little pamphlet of that week's service information, So spoilers for anyone at a Faith Lutheran Church, I would just draw on the back of them. And I would draw these intricate G.I. Joe scenes. And many of them would be about the play session I was about to enter into later on that day.
Mrs. Slepsky, I think there's something wrong with your son. Yeah. We want to talk to you about Joe. Yeah. We
Well,
found these drawings.
Listen, that's how I learned it. Yeah, we're concerned he's into ninjas. He's just always drawing ninjas and swords. Yeah. Oh, I used to daydream. I used to imagine if I was sitting in church, I would look up because I was pretty bored. I would look up and be like, man, if Cobra attacked this building right now, they would probably come in through that window and that window and that window, and we'd have to duck under here. Like that was how my brain operated, and it was specifically about if Cobra attacked and if I were a member of the G.I. Joe team.
Wow,
that is an absolute truth.
See, that for the parents out there, there's nothing wrong with iPads. It prevents you from sitting in church daydreaming about toxovipers spraying sludge.
Today those thoughts are shared on a message board, and my mom's being called into the police station to be like, we found some disturbing messages.
Yeah, the intelligence officers. Yeah. Like, we think your son is dealing with ninjas.
We think he's got a direct line to Maine, and he's importing ninja swords.
Do you know a Dr. Mindbender? Have you ever been treated by him?
We see he just got braces. Does your doctor happen to be Dr. Mindbender? Does that sound right? Are your taxes done by a rap tour?
Yeah, that's right. He was a tax
Yeah,
man.
he was a tax attorney. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Funny.
how awesome
It's
was
funny
it?
you're saying this. This is just a little tease for long-time listeners. I kind of started this summer's fun project. Last year we did a little tease. Last year we did G.I. Columbo. A couple years prior we did, certainly did Cold Slither. We did what did we call the murder mystery show? My Special Missions. We did My Special Missions.
Yeah, from My Favorite Murder.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, right. Yeah, we did that. I just started writing this summer's, and it happens to have Raptor as the lead character. So, heads up.
Good.
Yeah, heads up.
Well, there should have been, if you're going to be modernizing GI Joe, I often think about Scoop. If that was today, Scoop would very much, his name would just be Podcast, and he'd be a podcaster.
Absolutely. I don't know about
embedded
you,
with GI Joe.
As a fellow podcaster, every single time now I see in like a movie or something where they make it, there's usually a joke. The kid's like, I have a podcast. I turn to my wife and I go, I feel seen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I hate the way we've become like caricatures of ourselves.
I know.
But then again, I do find myself sometimes like in my basement reading like these old legal reports, and I'm like, what do I think I'm going to break this case or something? I am such an idiot.
I mean, you do great stuff. So I mean, just so you get our listeners caught up, tell us more about Nighttime Podcast.
I do. I do. I explore Canadian crime stories, missing persons cases, and just weird, offbeat, unique stories. It could be a UFO sighting, or it could be an unexplained archaeological site, let's say. And I think what I try to do to differentiate myself from a lot of other shows is I base a lot of what I do on firsthand interviews with people affected by the story. So if it's a missing persons case, I would strive to have friends and family of the missing person involved, rather than me kind of reciting details as found on Wikipedia as an example. But people who find my show will probably see that I also will have people on both sides of the story. So what I'm probably most known for is I did a series of episodes about a planned mass shooting event at a mall in Halifax where I live. And my guest on that series was the woman who was responsible. She actually came to Canada from your neck of the woods. She was from Geneva, Illinois, met a guy online and decided to come to Canada because they had a shared fascination with the Columbine event.
You had her on your show.
Yeah, she actually was
before or after she got caught. I'm assuming
after she was
from jail.
Yeah, what happened was my show was aired on the local college radio at the time, and she was held in prison. She got arrested at the border by border security, and she was held at a prison in my city, and so she could hear my show played on college radio. And she felt that the news was getting her story wrong, but that this podcaster is able to give a compassionate look at different sides of stories. So maybe he can help me tell people what actually happened in my side of the story.
Wow.
So she agreed to come on and tell her story. And this was when her case was still in the courts, which was really surprising.
Really, that seems ill-advised.
Certainly does, yeah.
Yeah. Well, good for you, though. So, I mean, you must have blown up after that.
Well, I think especially locally, because it was a big deal when that happened here in Halifax. That was a major, major story, and nobody knew the real story or heard directly from her. So to have the main subject of a massive story tell their side of it in such a raw format of as a 3 45-minute long interviews on a podcast can be, I think that surprised a lot of people. And even just that style of story, to hear someone speak on it casually and openly is unusual. Like there's this idea of, there's a manifesto published or something, but this is different. This is like a casual conversation where I made a point to not challenge her on her beliefs, because of course I disagree, but I really just wanted to hear, her motivation and what leads someone to end up in these horrible situations that play out all too often. And yeah, I think that was accomplished, but certainly not for the
credit to you. That's a sign of a talented broadcaster.
Yeah, but certainly not something for the the casual listeners. I think it gets quite heavy.
And was she eventually found guilty and all that? Is she in jail right now?
Oh yeah, she was found guilty and received a life sentence. She's in Canada now for a while before she can go back to the U.S. And when she's out, she will be out of prison. That is, she'll be deported right back to the U.S. And
Yeah. Well, look out, Geneva. So there is a greater than zero chance that she's listened to my show because I was a guest on your show.
are you worried about your safety?
Well, no. I just always think those things are funny because I'm assuming she still listens to your show.
I think so. Yeah.
And you had me on a couple months ago. Amazing.
Yeah, so
she might be listening right now. If so, God bless.
Yeah.
God
Joe
bless.
doesn't like you either.
God bless. Hey, listen, stop shooting people up. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's weird to see the worlds combine, but I think I get into a lot of dark stuff on my show, and G.I. Joe offers a lot of escapism.
Yeah.
Like when Dominic and I sit down at the end of the night, like we will in about another 45 minutes, what we do when it's bedtime, he brushes his teeth, he does all that, and I help him with it, pack his lunch for school the next morning. Then we go to the bedroom, turn the lights off, except for his little reading light, and we pull out the next issue.
Awesome.
And we don't read in our heads. We read aloud in voices. We go through the whole thing. And then once we're done the comic, I'll wish him a good night. And the next thing he does, he pulls up his iPad, opens the Joe on Joe podcast. And we're premium feed subscribers.
Oh!
And he'll go through to, after tonight, episode 80. And he'll lay in 90, sorry. While he's going to sleep, he'll listen to you. And if he falls asleep, he'll finish it the next day.
Awesome. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, but it's and because of that, I appreciate you not having like foul language or any of that stuff. Like a lot of podcasts do, but yours is like despite it being loose and discussion based and casual, it's always appropriate for him and his little brother. He loves it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. That was a conscious choice. I am Dom, don't hear this. I'm very vulgar in real life. And so when we did this, I said I want to challenge myself and not do that because G.I. Joe meant so much to me when I was a kid. And I wanted, my hope was that, we'd reach people like you, Dom, people who are coming up and try to turn you onto it because if anything, us old heads need to be ambassadors of the brand, and to get our youth interested in it because otherwise it's going to die on the vine, There's
and it's almost there, to be honest.
Yeah. I'm really curious what happens next with the comic book thing. There's a lot of speculation and people are assuming where the comic book license is going to go, but we're coming up on May and that announcement hasn't been made. And just what the future of the brand's going to be and all that. So,
well, I think it needs a fresh reboot that doesn't sway too far from the original path. Like I think all those other shows we mentioned, like Renegades and Extreme and all this stuff, they just ruined it. I think stick with the comics, stick with what works, and go from there. And it's like, I don't know. I just think it's such an amazing IP that for them to just leave it on a shelf or come up with the live action movies, which were, I just think, an embarrassment. At least it seems to be, or a waste of money. I don't know. It's ready to be reborn.
I saw Mario last weekend, Mario Brothers. So great.
I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely great. 100% geared. It was really fascinating because obviously it is geared towards younger kids. So, I'm not their target audience. I really enjoyed it though. But like the pacing of it was so fast and it was so like boom, 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 boom for like a young attention span. Animation you can cover as we saw in G.I. Joe the animated actual movie, you can do a lot of things that you can't do with live action because live action is going to cost you $200 million to do. In animation you have a budget of anything. With CGI and like they got that new Turtles, there's a new CGI Turtles coming out with like that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse animation style a little bit like that. Not saying I want that for G.I. Joe, but conceptually the future of G.I. Joe easily should probably be animated. And you can cover so much ground and do so many epic stories and still keep it personal with animation that you're not going to be able to do.
Or get Sunbow to do it and use that same design.
Sunbow, some like Sunbow's around. But yeah, but you're right.
They got to come back too.
You know what would look great? The Sunbow graphics, like the look, done in that, I'll call it the Archer style of animation. I don't know exactly what that animation is called these days, but they do a lot of the animated TV shows, or like the adventure shows are very done in the Archer style.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, they just put out that Elvis Secret Agent thing on Netflix, which is fun, funny. I'm an Elvis fan, so it's entertaining. But like that's that Archer style, you know, where there's not a ton of movement on it, but it's thick lines, it's very bold. Like you could do something like that with G.I. Joe in the Sunbow style, and I don't know. I really think the key is setting it retro. I really,
I
just
agree.
Some things are of their time, you know. A lot of people say like the Fantastic Four, as a both as a comic book really and as a movie, it's so rooted in the '60s that you kind of sort of have to somehow ping off that, you know, either in vibe or actual set it in the '60s, you know, and do some time travel thing. I think G.I. Joe's kind of like that.
I agree 100%. It's got so many great characters, so many great stories that aren't told outside of the comics. Like, for example, like the whole thing with Cobra Island and the battle for Cobra Island.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing stuff that would be so good. Like if the Sunbow or G.I. Joe the movie, instead of going in that bizarre direction, if they had to just made the movie version
Of
of
Cobra
the
Island.
battle for Cobra Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they could have fit it all in an hour and a half and it would have been incredible.
Totally. It would have been great. You know, like, I mean, it's literally, it's the plot of, and maybe they took it from it, but it's the plot of Superman, the movie, right? Or I'm sorry, Superman Returns. So I guess they wouldn't have taken it. Superman, the movie was about land. And then when Superman Returns happens, which is 20 years after the movie, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That was about the hunk of land coming up. And then that was going to be Luthor Island and made of kryptonite and all that stuff. Yeah, like you could do a movie. They could have done a movie about that. That would have been wild.
Instead, we got whatever that was. That movie, as an adult now watching it, I'm just like, what were they thinking? But again, as a kid, it worked for me.
Yeah,
I was
there's
right into it.
There's so much charm and character stuff in it. You know, that really spoke to me as a kid. But yeah, like as a plot, it was wild because it just changed the whole direction of everything you knew, but not necessarily in a great way.
Yeah,
And
you
even
did
as
a great
kid, I
job
was
with
like,
it.
you know, I knew who Don Johnson was. I was like, Don Johnson's not going to do a cartoon. Like, he's not going to, like, he's, what? Huh? And I recognized Burgess, and I love Burgess Meredith, and I recognized him as a kid, too. And I'm like, well, he's not, Burgess, he's the Penguin. He's not going to do.
Yeah. But the telling you did on Joe, or the way you covered it, where you had just like kind of it seemed like you had a group of friends over watching it. That was cool. We listened to that right afterwards.
Yeah, that was every person in Los Angeles that had ever been on the show. I literally invited, and I think we ended up having 18 people at my house for it. How
many dogs were there? Because I remember hearing dogs moving around
multiple. We had a lot of mics. We had like 7 mics. It was a cluster. But it was fun. It was neat, and I was just like, screw it. We're gonna figure out how to make this work. Anyone who's ever been, come on over. We'll have pizza and we'll watch G.I. Joe the cartoon.
Yeah, but good movie. But the intro, man, that is some of the probably 2 of the best minutes of animation.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's Larry Houston, and he was a real nice dude. You meet him at shows and stuff, but that's his calling card, and I think you do that. You should be able to work anywhere. Dom, do you remember the first time you saw the opening for G.I. Joe the movie?
I feel like you showed me it before we watched it.
I think I played you a second of it, and then I was like, no, we got to save this for when we naturally watch the movie. Because we got the high def, I found like the 4K version.
Oh, nice.
So I was like, no, let's save it. I'm not watching this on YouTube.
Dom, as a fellow Snake Eyes aficionado, as you and I both are, is there anything better than Snake Eyes flipping over the trouble bubble, kicking the guy out of the seat, and taking it over and flying off? There's nothing better, is there?
Yeah, it's one thing to hijack a car, but hijacking a helicopter is a whole different skill.
That was such a smooth move, man. And trust me, he then did that all the time in my play. Like, that was the move then. That was 100% was incorporated into playing with the Joes. That's how people stole trouble bubbles from people.
I really like the way they reinvented the theme song, because in the movie it's like this dark, like coming through the night,
Cobra.
And then without even any prompting, it just then turns into the regular theme. And so the musician who put that together, as I have a background in music, would be very hard to take a well-known little tune and then add this like dark brooding buildup, and it's cool the way they did it.
All the balloons, like there's so many balloons being animated. That's expensive.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah,
I've seen him talk about it. Like they gave him this huge budget for it, and they're like, go crazy. And he's like, this is exactly everything I would want to see.
Yeah, at the time, if you compare it with, like, if you watch it now in high def and compare it with anything else from that era, it's a huge step up.
It's funny you're saying this, because I literally watched it an hour ago before we started recording. Because because I was randomly on Vudu, VUDU, that the digital website, digital movie website, and I noticed that G.I. Joe the movie was on sale. So listeners, if you're hearing this, I don't know if it'll still be on sale next week when this drops. But it was only $6. So, I mean, I already have the DVDs and stuff. I have multiple copies, but I, for some reason, never had it digitally. So I snapped it up. So I was watching it right before we got on. Yeah, getting in the mood.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie.
It's amazing.
It is what it is, actually. That's what I should say. I don't know if it's amazing, but
it's got some slow points. But listen, we are here to both praise Caesar and not praise Caesar. So, Jordan, Dom, if there's one thing that we can sum up this generational Joe conversation about, and the way that it connects you guys, what would Jordan? We'll start with you. What would be the one thing that you're happy about with G.I. Joe that it's connected you with your son?
Well, it's hard to narrow it down to one, but ultimately it's that it allows my son and I to experience the great stories together, but at the same time talk about my childhood and what life was like when I was a kid. Because there's both of those things are happening. We'll sit down and read a comic and we're experiencing the story and the highs and lows of the story and all that. But at the same time, we're looking at the ads in the comic. And I'm like, oh, look, the Ninja Turtles NES game. I remember when that came out. And, so there's so much of the nostalgia, talking about my childhood, and again enjoying the story. So, and it gives us something to look forward to. We finish a story and then it's like, I can't wait to find out what happens tomorrow night. Where we just left off in the comics was Road Pig had hit like the sports car and captured
those are
two of the guys.
Those are the Mark Bright issues, right? Wasn't he the penciler at the time?
Yeah. So where we're at now, we get to find out what Road Pig is going to do to these two. But anyway, that's my long answer of the one thing.
I love it. It's such a great answer. Dom, is there anything about G.I. Joe that you really, really love that you connect with your father? Like, what part about connecting with your dad do you really love about G.I. Joe?
I really enjoy like collecting stuff and having the battles. Like, it's something that like we don't do it often, but like I love us all going downstairs and just like getting Joes and having a battle. It's amazing.
Do you find it like helps you get to know your dad better? Spend more time with him and stuff? That's great. That's great. It's so true. It's all so very true. And I second all those emotions. It's great. Jordan, as I'll say this because in case my mom's listening, I'm trying to get my mother on the show, and every time I talk to her, she's like, "Oh, I don't think I want to be on your show. I'll listen. I don't want to be on your show, but I'm trying." So this is a bit of a tease, Mary Lynn. If you hear this, I want to get you on Joe on Joe.
It. People should hear that.
I'm gonna strive. I'm gonna be seeing her in a few weeks, so we'll see.
And you as the host, it's your origin story as well. Like you can tell us the story, but we should hear from her. I want to know the true story of Joe on Joe Slipsky.
She'd be like, "You were just a big Inhumanoids fan, and you were just so pissed off when they stopped making them, so you had nothing to do but go to G.I. Joe." All right. You got me. All right. Well, Jordan and Dom, thank you so much. Every listeners, go to at Nighttime Pod. That's these guys on social. That's Jordan's podcast, all about true Canadian crime, the kindest crime of them all. They have to import their criminals from Geneva, Illinois. Fabulous to have you on. Fabulous to see you. Fabulous to talk about this stuff. I think this is the kind of stuff that really connects to all of us.
The pleasure is ours, Joe. I think we've made it clear your show has brought this to another level as well. Getting to debrief the storylines and everything else with you has been added a whole nother dimension to it. So thank you.
You honor me by letting me be a part of that connection. I appreciate you both. So listen, now you know more about connecting with your parents and your children, and Joeing is half the battle.